Hey guys, it's Paul and welcome back to my channel. I have my bachelor's in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I'm going to say that for the next 78 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. Also, I'm a board member for a nonprofit that helps with missing people cases, so if you have a missing person, a loved one that you have not been able to reach for a long time, please get a hold of us. We have different types of resources that we can offer you, such as billboards is our huge thing right now. We help with social media presence, searches, and anything that we can. And today we are here with another Unsolved in West Virginia series. But if you ask some people, they would say that this one is solved, but most people do not believe the person that was charged at the end of this is who had to do with it. So I found this one super interesting, and just buckle up because we're going to be here for a while on this video. And today we are going to be talking about the WVU Coed murders. The one thing that aggravates me the most to no end of this case is somewhere through the research and through people sharing this story, it was really lost on who Merritt and Karen were as people. So I'm going to give you as much description as I could find, but unfortunately there's not very much description on either of them. But we'll talk about Merritt Malarick first. She was from New Jersey and she was the youngest of 3 siblings. She did have a sister named Peggy that we will hear about later, and she was a freshman at WVU. She stayed in the Westchester Hall, and Merritt did like to write to her friends. There were a few things that came forward when, this whole case was going on and showed the police some letters. One of them didn't show negativity at all, and it was right around the time these two disappeared. But about 2 days later, it was found that there was a letter that stated she just needed a break. She had a lot going on and she just needed to take a few days to herself. And then there was Karen Farrell. She was from Quinwood, West Virginia, and she was known to be adopted. She was also a freshman at WVU and stayed in the same hall as Merritt. And so on January 18th, 1970, the second semester at WVU had just started. So the girls were wanting to go do something fun with each other. It had been a few weeks since they've seen each other, so they left downtown to High Street. And about 7 p.m. they went to the Metropolitan Theater to watch Oliver. Now, at this point, this was when there was intermissions still during movie showings. And during the intermission, Merritt introduced Karen to the 2 people that were sitting behind them. Their names were Skip and Itzy. I couldn't find a definitive answer on how Merritt knew Skip and Itzy, but they did end up going back into intermission together and kind of became a group of 4 until the girls disappeared. Around 11 p.m. the movie was over and they decided to start heading home. It had began to rain fairly heavy from what I understand, and being January, I believe that it was starting to turn into snow. So Skip and Itzy were going to go catch a bus, but Merritt and Karen were going to hitchhike. So this was really a common way for Merritt and Karen, or really any WVU student, to get around. They did find a ride pretty fast, and Skip said they watched them get into the car. Skip said they saw them start to talk to the driver, and he seemed to be in his mid-40s. All 3, the driver and the 2 girls, were sitting in the front seat. It was the driver, Merritt was in the middle, and Karen was near the door. Skip said they thought the car was a Chevrolet and it was cream colored. And when they drove away, they didn't even really make eye contact with Skip and Itzy, which doesn't really seem that weird in hindsight, but it could also show that maybe the girls were scared. Maybe he had said something to them when they got in the car, or who really knows, right? Now, curfew at the dorms were midnight, and these girls definitely missed that. They weren't really known to ever stay out all night. Merritt seemed to be very timely. I never saw where she had missed curfew before. Now, Karen would miss it by a few minutes, but she was always there. So red flags went crazy crazy when these girls didn't show back. Within 2 hours, these girls were reported missing, so the investigation really started as fast as it could. But when they gave a description of the girls for the missing person reports, it was very vague, and people do wonder if that has something to do with not recognizing them if they were seen out in public during or around the time they went missing. A lot of the students gathered on the 4th floor of Westchester Hall. Merritt's roommate was a huge advocate for these girls. She collected a lot of tips on their disappearance, and she really would try to keep in contact with the police as much as possible. All these girls in this dorm hall would. You know, once you're in a dorm for a little bit, you do become a family, and these students wanted to find what happened to their sisters, Merritt and Karen. But where Merritt did right, she wanted to kind of take off for a few days and be by herself and not really deal with the stresses of life. The police did kind of take it more as a runaway case at first. Merritt had every right to walk off and not tell anybody where she was going. But to up and leave at 11:15, 11:20 at night, if you think about by the time they left the movies, I still feel like it probably should have been taken a little bit more seriously. The community really thought there must have been foul play. They didn't believe the investigation was as strong as it could be, and they started holding rallies and trying to get people to sign petitions to really get this investigation taken more seriously. These girls are missing. These freshmen, 19, maybe 18-year-old girls are missing. The petition stated that this investigation wasn't being taken seriously and there needed to be hitchhiking reform. It was already illegal in Morgantown to hitchhike, but there wasn't public transportation for students around Morgantown like there is now. So they fought to get better bus systems or just better public transportation in this area so people didn't have to hitchhike. And on top of that, they wanted the FBI involved in this case. That was also on the petition. And they got around 2,000 signatures. 2,000 people believed this case was not being taken seriously hardly at all. Morgantown did end up adding a better bus system and emergency phones around the area. But the FBI did deny joining just because they didn't really want to step on toes. They also stated that there was no proof that there was an interstate crime, so there was no reason for them to really dig into the case. And a week after these girls went missing, a whole 7 days, is when 2 police officers were sent to WVU to question students and faculty on Merritt and Karen. There is so much that could have happened in those 7 days, and so many people that could have made up a story or an alibi. So the girls went missing on January 18th. We are now fast forwarding to March 1st. On March 1st, 1970, there was a man named Stephen Trickett. He was searching for pop bottles along the road to honestly just make some extra money. Turn those bottles in and get a few extra bucks. And it was helping with the littering, so is what it is. But while he was searching for this, he found a purse along the side of the road. It was about 50 feet from it, and it was soaking wet. And it had 13 cents and a receipt in it. So the police wondered if maybe this was one of the girls' purses. So they got a hold of Merritt's roommate. They asked her if she could identify the purse as Merritt's and if this was the one that she knew she was carrying at the time. Well, Merritt's roommate was actually out of town, so she couldn't come in and identify it in person. But what she told the police was, we have identical purses, literally matching purses. Why don't you go into the dorm room and see if this purse you found matches my purse that is there? And so that's actually exactly what the police did, and it became a match for Merritt Millerick. And there were too many suspects, just too many. And then on top of that, there was too many rumors. And it was so hard for the police at this point to keep up with everything. They really did look into every avenue they could, but everything just led to nothing. There was just a lot going around this case, and it was super hard at this point to really decide what was important and what wasn't. So at a certain point, unfortunately, they had to assume that maybe their girls were gone. So Marin's family did try to get dental records for Marin just in case they did find a body, they would have them on hand fairly fast. But when they picked them up, the dentist said she is going to be in significant pain wherever she is because she needed a root canal, and she was actually supposed to come in to get that done. And on March 25th, Governor Moore was sick of the police not taking this as seriously as possible. So he actually ordered 2 state troopers that were in the area, Morgantown, for totally separate reasons, to drop their case they're working on and work on the WVU case. He knew we had to find those girls. And around this time, the students also took the petition to Governor Moore. They had a meeting the 1st of April with him. It is the first time the public had heard that we found Marin's purse. And about this time, the media had been hinting that the police wasn't doing their job very well, but this is when the all-out war started between the police force and the media. So once they were called out, they finally did a helicopter surveillance search over the area that Marin's purse was found. And there just unfortunately was nothing there. Now, Peter Gooden was a state trooper, if I'm not mistaken, and he had came into Morgantown's police to get some details on this case. But when he came in, he noticed that Marin's purse was sitting in the back of the room on a file cabinet, not put into evidence, not taken care of, just out in the open and potentially contaminated. And let me tell you, Peter Gooden was intelligent at his job. He was brilliant when it came to crime scene investigation and had educated himself numerous ways on this. So he knew how a crime scene should definitely be constructed, and he also knew how evidence should be stored and kept and how incredibly important that is. And I'll just be honest, he was very open on how he feels the Morgantown police handled this case. He found out multiple updates on this case from the news instead of the Morgantown police themselves. And he would find out up to 24 hours, if not longer, after these things were happening. So there was like no communication about this case going on at all. And he ended up writing a letter that he made public, and he accused almost every single officer that had touched this case of negligence, and just, let the public know how he felt about how this case had been handled. And he even witnessed a phone call with Governor Moore's assistant Yost on April 10th or 11th, stating pretty much that they needed to make it seem that there had been a 4-person investigation team just going on this case the whole time, because Marin's parents were coming to Morgantown and they wanted to talk about what had been found and what had been done in the investigation. And to be honest, there wasn't much. So they need to figure things out, and they needed to get their story straight. And he even asked how good of a liar he was. But unfortunately, the minute Peter Gooden, the only person that seemed to be fighting for Merit and Karen, became vocal about how horrible he thought this case was handled, he knew he was going to get fired. And he said that. And he did. He got fired the next day. And he was even charged with the fact that he was lessening the trust in the police and the citizens. He was lowering the morale of troopers, insubordination, and making unsubstantiated claims about the department. He did end up fighting this because he wasn't wrong, and ended up being reinstated the next year. But this was when the care of Governor Moore switched from the girls to the reputation of the state police, and he ended up pretty much giving completely up on the investigation when he was one of the biggest fighters for their justice. And now the governor and the Dominion News were also at war. So at some point the police also chose not to trust Marin's roommate anymore either. There were a few things that were a little suspicious, but I think people forget that this had to be traumatic for Marin's roommate also. But her roommate did claim on March 25th, 1970, she received a letter and that it had 12 directions on it. And one of those directions was told to tell the police that she thought she should be the lead investigator in this situation, and pretty much tell them that the whole task force should be done looking into this case. Now, she never told the police about this letter, and that does seem a little weird, I guess. But you gotta think of all the rumors and everything that was happening around this time. It's very possible she just thought it was one of the crazy antics going around. But she did also claim that at some point she got a phone call to the dorm from someone with a foreign accent. They said they were not going to say who they were, but whoever came forward in this case would probably be killed fairly immediately. And she asked them if the girls would be found, and they said it would be really hard to find them, and that they were separated, and they would be about 30 miles apart from each other. And I do think she did end up telling the police about this, but either way, the police chose to decide that Merritt's roommate just wasn't very reliable anymore. The state police started receiving some letters too. Now, these weren't signed by the same person that had sent Merritt supposedly a letter, and I do think, like, once I looked into it, it wasn't linked at all. But they did. In April, they started receiving letters. The 9th was the very first one. It was postmarked about 75 miles outside of Morgantown in Cumberland, Maryland, and it read, "Gentlemen, I have information on the whereabouts of the bodies of the 2 missing WVU Coeds, Merritt Malarick and Karen Farrell. Follow the directions very carefully to the nth degree, and it will lead you to a wooded forest land. Enter into the forest exactly 1 mile. There are bodies. 25 plus 1 equals 26 miles. I'll reveal myself when the bodies are located. Signed, Triangle." Now, 2 state troopers did drive to this area that the letter talked about, but there was no bodies in this area. They couldn't find anything around this area at all. And the governor did end up choosing to order the search to go back to where they found Merritt's purse. There was around 200 to 300 state troopers, National Guardsmen, and even just volunteers wanting to search this area for Merritt and Karen. It was very wooded and dense, so they needed every person they could get. And they did end up finding quite a bit of belongings. Where Merritt's purse was, they found a pill bottle of Merritt's, her glasses, a pink compact, Karen's purse, a couple of ballpoint pens, a Ronzon gas lighter, Karen's pill bottle, a tube of lipstick, eyeshadow pencil, mascara, a brush, a green scarf, and Karen's license. So then came a second letter, which repeated the same exact directions. It tried to push them to continue searching, and it was the same handwriting as the last letter, and it was also signed Triangle. So at this point, a group of professionals decided, we're going to figure out who wrote this letter. And the specialists that were on this assignment were state police, a WVU panel of like psychiatrists and psychologists, and 2 mental health groups. And what they thought about the person that wrote this letter, they thought for sure they'd have to be under 30 years old. And they probably didn't graduate college, but they did think that this person must be pretty clever, you know, having a little bit of intelligence behind him. But they did believe this person probably did think they were better than other people. He seemed very anxious in his writings. It's like he was trying to rush them to find the bodies, which was not common in killers. It's like he needed it off his conscience, or he just needed to talk about it, and it just was, you know, not like a normal person that would have caused this crime. It's clear he had an imagination, just the way he wrote, the wording he used. He seemed to enjoy this fantasy life of being Triangle and not using his real identity. And it was clear he liked games. So again, it seemed that he was clever. And again, it seemed that it was a superior attitude. Like he was the gamekeeper and he was just ordering all of us around. But at the same time, he did seem emotionally monotone in that he could control his emotions fairly well. And maybe whatever happened to these girls was just a breaking point he hit, which also might explain why he needs to clear his conscience. On April 16th, 1970, 88 days later, 2 bodies were found 30 feet from the creek, but they were about 296 feet from the road. One thing that the police did say was he was completely off on measurements. 26 and 296 are not the same number by any means. They were covered in brush and large stones. They were under a tree that had fallen down, and it's said to have probably taken these people a long time to bury them and to gather all the material that they put on top of them. It seemed like a lot of work, but it's possible they did it this intricately so it was easier for them to recognize to come back and visit later. The bodies were fully clothed. They had the same outfits that they went missing in, so it is thought that whatever happened to them happened that night. But 2 pieces of clothing were missing: Merritt's fur-lined boots and Karen's fur coat. So they thought maybe this is someone who's into like a fur fetish or someone who really is interested in fur. They were laying face down and Karen was on top of Merritt. They were at an angle from each other where their chests were like the point of center and their legs were like angled away from each other. So they were kind of in an X pattern. After 88 days, they were fairly decomposed. Karen was more decomposed than Merritt, since Karen's body actually shielded Merritt from a lot of the earth that would speed up her decomposition. But the biggest thing about these bodies was they were headless. They had been completely decapitated. Their heads were just gone. The National Guardsmen are the ones that had went out there to find them, and they did not let any media to this place, and they actually took any footage that people had taken at this burial site. So after the bodies were found, letters continued. There was an alleged letter to the governor. It said there were 4 more girls that were going to die before this killer was found. It never happened, but it did scare a lot of people, especially people at WVU, because they figured they would be around that area. And this caused the male students to be jackasses and make pranks out of all this stuff. So, but it did cause a lot of the female students to start carrying protection, to have a knife on them or have something in case they were in danger. Now, there was a 3rd letter to the state police. It was less than a week after the bodies were found, and it said, "Gentlemen, I have delayed writing another letter in hopes you include more information by this concerning the finding of the bodies. The heads can be found from the position of the bodies by striking out 10 degrees southwest for the first head and approximately 10 degrees southeast for the second, roughly 1 mile. You are already 7/10 of a mile. They are within the mine entrance, if you can call it an entrance considering its condition. They are buried not over 1 foot in depth. The ones responsible for murders scattered some of the girls' personal effects over the general area, creating a pattern of confusion, making it difficult for you to pinpoint any exact location. My first 2 letters triggered your intensive search. Don't give up now. I will identify myself when your investigation is completed. Sincerely, Triangle." And then this person had the balls to write a letter to Merritt's parents. And this is actually the last letter that Triangle writes. "Dear Dr. and Mrs. Malarick, I have sent 3 letters to the Morgantown State Police Detachment concerning your daughter, Merritt and Karen. The first and second letters were taken with some seriousness and instituted a search, which was successful in locating the 2 bodies minus the heads, which were needed for other purposes. All of a sudden, the police are complaining about an error in mileage, as stated in my second letter. After one has driven an oval pattern for 26 miles under the weather conditions of January and under the involved circumstances, it is possible to make an 18-mile error in the precise location of the bodies. Nevertheless, they were found south of the convey. Before receiving them, they really had nothing to go on. They also expected me to jump immediately and identify myself. I did say I would identify myself when the bodies were found, but the police have left too many loose ends on the case. The third letter, which they have chosen to do little about, states about as specifically as possible the location of the girls' heads. If you have not seen any of the letters, may I suggest you ask the police to see all 3. I'm hoping this messy situation is brought to a conclusion for all sakes. Sincerely, Triangle. Just the way he talks in that to this family. Like, this is just something that supposedly Triangle did, but this family, you're talking about their daughter. Do not tie their family into your issue with the police. Now, the police's view on Triangle was complicated. To the public, they really didn't want them to think they even took Triangle seriously. But in private and just to the police force, he was one of the prime suspects. Yes, he got a lot wrong, but his persistence and the way he was handling himself was interesting. How could they not look into him? The police did look into several mine shafts, but there was nothing. They tried to look at any entrances, not much, but a state trooper, West, did try to hyperfixate on Triangle, and he did get a handwriting analysis professional, and he also tried to mimic his handwriting just so he could know it as backwards and forwards as he could. And he just kind of felt that this person must have been in some type of crime before. He was digging through police cases and found a pink note card in just a random file that had the exact same handwriting as Triangle, but it wasn't signed Triangle. And this note was linked to Stephen Hopt Jr. He was a violent rapist from Pennsylvania. He had escaped the police in rush hour traffic, and he had stolen a gun and a car. And he is known to have taken Pennsylvania on the biggest manhunt ever in their history. The pink card was sent off to examine against Triangle's handwriting, but that's actually who they didn't end up linking the letters to. They linked it to some members of a psychic cult. But the authors of these letters were Mr. Fred Shannon, Mrs. Annabelle Young, and her son, Dr. Richard Warren Hoover. And that is actually how, later when I'm talking about the theories, they think it has to do with a cult for what happened to them. And the media did not let up. They actually buckled down harder on the investigation once the girls were found headless, because wow, now we have a lot more questions. But one thing the media didn't do was mock Triangle, because even before they found out who Triangle was, he might not have been who hurt these girls, but he did still seem dangerous. And even after the bodies were found, the Westchester girls in that dorm were going through hell. They were being told that they were going to be sent body parts in the mail, so they couldn't even receive mail or letters from their family anymore. And they had also been told there was a man that had a master key that would open up any dorm room in Westchester Hall. So there was literally no way for these girls to even feel safe locked in their dorms. It was just getting a lot for them to handle. And now we are going to talk about a Eugene Paul Clawson. He was 36 years old, 6 feet 2.5 inches, 141 pounds, blue-eyed and brown-haired, Roman Catholic man. He did have Klinefelter syndrome, which means he had an extra X chromosome, and some symptoms of that were actually ADHD, breast enlargement, delayed puberty, flaccid muscles, infertility, a small penis, low libido, and he suffered a few of these symptoms. He was abused by pretty much anyone that was around him, and even the kids in Point Marion raped him. So he wasn't even safe with friends his age. He was just not a great student. Most teachers just put him in the back and let him fend for himself, and he was actually ran out of town by the age of 16. He was bisexual, and he did believe at one point he was trans, but his mom talked him out of surgeries because it would be embarrassing for her. And this ended up making him take way more testosterone than he needed because he was going to be extremely masculine then. He was extremely suicidal. He tried multiple times with pills and knives. And then he ended up going into the military for a short time. And he said actually this was the happiest point of his life because he was afraid of everything he grew up around. He had an extensive criminal record. In 1958, he stole 2 separate cars and was sent to reform school for a little over a year. And he wasn't charged with anything except for burglary and larceny until 1960. He was then charged with sodomizing an 11-year-old boy, so he was sent to Pittsburgh Penitentiary. But as we all know, sexual crimes, especially violent sexual crimes, you don't spend in prison or jail very long at all. So by 1963, he was charged with sodomizing a female now. Wish I could make this stuff up. And in 1973, he was charged with homosexual offenses of a minor, where he kidnapped and kept this boy in his home for over a month. And then he was arrested for carnal abuse of a 13-year-old girl and was arrested for over a year for this one at least. His cellmate, Felton Harp, did come forward and say that he thought that he killed Merritt and Karen, that he had been having nightmares for months and that he was pretty sure that's what it was about and it was his guilty conscience. And he said that's why he confessed, that Eugene told him that he did it because it was eating away at him. And Eugene did. He confessed to the crime. But his statement had quite a few details off. And I'm just going to be honest, his story is insane. If you listen to it, it makes no sense why anybody would do this. He said he got off work in the afternoon. He drove 30 miles to Point Marion where he dropped his car off at his mom's. He ended up hitchhiking to Pittsburgh, which was 65 miles away, and then stole a car from a lady and drove 75 miles to Morgantown. He said that he picked these girls up downtown and claimed he kidnapped them at gunpoint. He said that he forced them to perform unnatural sex acts on each other, and then he raped them one at a time in the back seat. He then drove them to a remote area. He shot them both in the head and then decapitated them with his brother's machete. He then had sex with their heads in the back of the car, and then he went back to Point Marion where he got rid of this car that he used. Now, he did end up recanting his statement later and said that he actually never did this. He made that all up. But at first, he did say he threw the heads and his gun over Con Hill and that he washed the machete off and brought it back to his brother. And he did take a necklace, a class ring, and a watch from the girls. Karen did wear her boyfriend's class ring on her necklace, so it did kind of match up to what they were missing from them. In New Jersey, did give him a polygraph test for West Virginia's police, even though it was not the best one, but he was deemed truthful. Now, they did call Pittsburgh to see if there was any cars stolen that day, and there was exactly 1 car that was reported stolen that night. And honestly, with all this information, they were able to convict him in 1973. They charged him with kidnapping, rape, and murder, and he received a life sentence. The murder conviction was overturned in 1977, but he was reconvicted in 1981. But you know, not everyone believes Eugene is the killer. I wouldn't rule him out, but I wouldn't not continue to look either. First of all, just his story of going to Point Marion and then going to Pittsburgh just to steal a car and then come to Morgantown and then abandon the car and then go to his mom's, that's a lot right? That's a lot. I don't think hardly anybody has ever put that much effort into it. And he kept saying that he sexually assaulted them, but they were fully clothed when they were found, and hardly any sexual assault victim that has been killed is redressed after the assault. Also, he kept saying that he stole a blue car, but everyone that saw the car said it was cream colored. And he said that he didn't pick them up anywhere near the movie theater, but Skip and Itzy have both said that it was about a block and a half from the movie theater. Like, it would have been in clear view of wherever he was picking them up at. And in his confession, he went above and beyond to make it look like he did it. It was like he was trying way too hard. So there's a lot of people that don't believe he did do it. Now, the police did go down to Con Hill to try to find the heads and the gun that he said that was thrown down there. There was also actually a bunch of mine entrances, abandoned of course, in that area, so they could look there too. They tried to call Clawson to get a better description on which one he meant, but he was no longer helpful. And they tried over a month any time that there wasn't snow on the ground to look through these mines and everything, but they just had no luck, really, because some of them were so deep, and so you needed so much more than just the investigation team to look through all this. And so they kind of just hit a dead end, and that's where this, investigation kind of stops. They have never been able to find the heads of these girls. I mean, it's been 1970 when this happened. Oh my gosh. I can't imagine. It breaks my heart. So what are some theories? If it's not Eugene Clawson and what he said, then how and who? It is thought to be only one killer. Most people agree on that. And some people also have thought that maybe it is Ted Bundy's first type of victims when he's still trying to figure out like his strategy and how he wanted to perform these horrendous murders that he did. This is not thought to be a strong theory, more of just, one of those sexy, fun to think about theories. But it was kind of interesting to read about. Now, there was dorm mates that reported a hitchhiking story that people thought maybe these girls were just victims of the same person. One of the dorm mates had told the RA that she had been at the Ogilvy Plaza hitchhiking to try to get back to the dorms. A white car pulled up, which is close to cream colored, and the man stood up and opened the driver's side door to let her in. She thought that was weird, so she kind of looked inside, and the passenger door was wired shut. Now, this driver has been described in different ways, one blonde hair, one brown hair, but it was greasy haired that was combed back, medium height but still kind of small build, and he looked like he was part of the working class, so not really thought to be a student. And the car was a white Impala, and that would kind of match the cream colored build of the car that Skip and Itzy explained. Now, there is this picture, and one of the only pictures of the crime scene, and I'll be honest, it was hard to figure out who that person in the picture was, but they ended up finding him. He was in a band, but he was known as a liar and had a history of just weird behavior. And he also had a history of sexual offenses against women. His dog drug out this blanket covered in blood during practice one day, and he said that that's the blanket that his dog found near Merritt and Karen's bodies when he had went to the crime scene when that picture was taken. But he had a solid alibi. He was playing with his band in Petersburg, and he had stayed with the friend, and the friend completely vouched for him. So it's not really thought to be him, but it's interesting for sure. Now, there is a band called Ezra that Merritt and Karen did like. They had actually even went to see them at a local bar, so they were thought to like this band. And Merritt did know them better than Karen, but there was a lot of violence around their shows. 2 weeks before, they played a show in New Jersey where two 19-year-old co-eds were stabbed to death outside of the venue they were playing. And of course, no one blames any of the band members for this, but it is thought that if Merritt and Karen went and saw them play, it is possible that they've met someone that's violent within their fan base that is causing such craziness at their shows. And then here's the cult theory. Of course, Triangle ended up being cult members, and on top of that, it's possible that cult rituals cause for people to be beheaded. People have even talked about the crime scene. It just seemed very symbolic. And we even said it was marked a certain way, so maybe the killer could come back to it, or maybe that's like a burial process for a cult ritual. Who knows? And it is thought that these girls unfortunately haunt this area in Morgantown. If you're in the woods anywhere near their burial site, it is thought that you can hear voices, you can hear people walking around, and you feel just watched and just like a really uncomfortable presence. People even get like extremely nauseous when they're in this area. It is still considered an ongoing case. They're still definitely looking into it, and they still do accept any type of tips you want to send in. They've even had a search as lately as May 2022, so they really are still looking at what's happening to these girls. The search really didn't come up with anything that they had told the public, but it is awesome to hear that they seriously are taking it. And I don't think anything ever came out of these searches, but it is nice to know that they are still definitely taking tips seriously. And that's all I have for the WVU Coed murders. What in the world do you think happened to these girls? And where do you think their heads are? And thank you guys so much for watching. I am so sorry this is going to be a long one, but like and subscribe for me and hit that notification button. That way you're notified the next time I upload. And of course, I still have the GoFundMe for Crystal Young going. If you haven't watched her video, please go and watch it because her mom needs this PI and you need to know why. The video also just hit 1,000 views, so thank you guys so much. And I still have stickers for sale, of course. They are $2 each, and all proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation, so it is for a good cause. And thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!